An archive is more than just a building filled with old documents. It is a place where the past can communicate with the present. Imagine a seance as a way for those in the present to communicate with the past. Researching documents is kind of like that. It takes identification of sources and interpretation to understand them and to activate the communication. The State Archives preserves over 100 million communication items, documents, images, sound and film recordings, as well as digital records. Reviving the meaning of these materials is up to you, the researcher. Let's explore some of the different kinds of communication in the State Archives collections. The State Archives preserves personal communication donated to us in private collections, and some of the earliest forms in these collections are handwritten letters. In 1864, Martha Poteet wrote a letter to her husband who was away fighting in the Civil War. He had never seen his baby, but Martha traced the outline of the baby's hand and sent it to her husband so that he could feel a connection to his youngest daughter. Although the paper is damaged, we can still read, "My baby will be 4 weeks old Saturday. Write to me what to name her." Martha's letter not only communicated to her husband, but it also communicates now to us, giving us insight into the hardships women on the home front endured, such as having to plow fields while pregnant and recovering from childbirth. We can also learn from preserved correspondence how Christmas wishes have changed over time. A little girl dropped this letter to Santa in the Briggs Hardware Store's mailbox in 1932. She wished for a ball, galoshes, and doll clothes. Complementing home front correspondence, letters from the front lines teach us about how soldiers viewed their service. Butch Strickland was a soldier who fought and died in the Vietnam War. In 1967, his parents found a letter he had written them and his personal belongings. In it, he predicted his own death in the coming days. It closes with, "Don't mourn me, Mother, for I am happy I died fighting my country's enemies, and I will live forever in people's minds. Don't mourn me, for I died a soldier of the United States of America." Like communication, an equally powerful yet more disruptive concept is miscommunication. One of the most significant examples of miscommunication in American history is General Robert E. Lee's Special Order No. 191. In 1862, General Lee moved his army into Maryland, where he detailed the plans for his army on paper, including the command, "At Sharpsburg, cross the Potomac." A copy went to General Stonewall Jackson, who then hand-copied the order to send it to General D.H. Hill. But another copy Lee wrote never made it, as the Union Army followed the Confederates into Maryland. Two soldiers stumbled upon 3 cigars wrapped in the order. No one knows exactly how the orders came to be there, but the miscommunication proved monumental for the Union Army, as it now had advance notice of General Lee's movements. 4 days later, the course of the Civil War changed in favor of the Union at the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest day in American military history. General Hill kept the copy of the order he received with his papers, which his family later donated to the State Archives. Did you know that the State Archives has collections related to the history of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? One of the largest is the papers of Reginald Fessenden, a guy you've probably never heard of, but who made incredibly important contributions to the development of various communication technologies, including radio. Fessenden was an inventor who, while working for the U.S. Weather Bureau on Roanoke Island, started getting tired of the monotony of Morse code and the telegraph. What to thousands of people was a miracle became almost boring to him, and so he started tinkering with sound waves so that instead of taking down dots and dashes, you could actually hear someone's voice. After a few years of experimenting with transatlantic signaling between Massachusetts and Scotland, Fessenden gave the first ever radio program broadcast from Brant Rock, Massachusetts on Christmas Eve 1906. It included him playing records, reading, and giving a violin solo. This program, to the listener's surprise, was picked up by ships in the Atlantic and by operators as far south as Virginia. Although he left the world of radio soon after, Fessenden didn't stop inventing. It turns out that his time on Roanoke Island in 1900 overlapped with the Wright brothers' experiments in Kitty Hawk. These pioneers of 20th century technology became friends, and Fessenden even helped out Orville Wright with the development of a new motor in 1911. This is a great example of how communication connects us and enables our technological development. A less personalized and sometimes overlooked type of communication is that of propaganda or information presented to an audience to promote an idea or agenda. This type of communication is commonly presented in infographic form and can often be misleading or non-objective. While fighting for the right to vote during the women's suffrage movement, many female activists had to get creative when finding ways to spread their message to the widest audience possible. One of the ways suffragists chose to do this was by pasting cleverly worded pro-suffrage propaganda on handheld fans. This one sports the phrase, "Keep cool and raise a breeze for suffrage." Not only did this allow women to view the movement's message discreetly, but it also incorporated women's suffrage into the lives of average women, many of whom used fans like these on warm days. In addition to fans, the circulated publications had a certain charm, as they found a way to make these papers enjoyable while maintaining a serious overtone. Whether on a fan or not, these women suffragists knew how to effectively communicate what they believed to be right. However, the women suffragists weren't the only people who had the right to voice their opinion on women's right to vote. In fact, the anti-woman suffrage movement circulated publications of their own. This circular lists reasons why women should not be granted the right to vote, and states, "Stick to your guns. Don't let the South be governed by Susan B. Anthony, Fred Douglass, and Mrs. C.C. Catt." Both sides of the suffrage movement were able to communicate their positions with persuasive language. Consider also the popularized World War II propaganda. You're probably familiar with the Buy War Bonds message on World War II posters, but there were several other types of propaganda that ran during the war. Many were clearly meant to portray the enemy in as negative a light as possible to garner more support for the war, but a great many held a different set of objectives, like the Silence Means Security series, which held a clear warning about sharing sensitive secrets. There were also those that were put up to encourage public safety, like this warning about not sitting on your gas mask. These types of public service messages are still being used in a similar way today. One of the most important types of communication in our democratic society is between citizens and the government. Just as our government can use propaganda to communicate with us, there are several ways we as citizens can communicate right back, such as letter writing and petitions. The state archives preserves citizens' correspondence with the governor in the papers of each governor who has taken office in North Carolina. In this 1954 letter from Dorothy Berry, she clearly states her displeasure at Governor Umstead's support of segregation. As a North Carolina citizen, Berry felt the need to communicate her position to her elected official with the hope that he may reverse his stance on the issue, and her letter was preserved first by the governor's office and then in the last 75 years at the state archives. Another way citizens communicate their views to their elected officials is through petitions. Petitions enable everyday citizens to voice their opinions and influence topics the General Assembly discusses and the laws it passes or amends. Before Change.org and other sites, residents of North Carolina gathered signatures and submitted paper petitions to the General Assembly. These petitions, now housed at the state archives, range from the practical to the passionate to the fantastical. One common type of petition involved the practical purpose of creating new counties, such as this petition from residents of Edgecombe County. Edgecombe was a very large county at the time, and 255 citizens signed a statement that they were very much oppressed by having above 40 miles to ride to court. The courthouse was where much of the business of the county took place, presenting hardships for those who lived on the other side of the county. Even in a car, a 40-mile trip can take a long time. Imagine how long it would have taken people to get to court on a horse. The petition succeeded, and Nash County formed from the western part of Edgecombe in 1777. Other petitions are more passionate and humanitarian in nature, such as this petition from the Female Benevolent Association of Jamestown, Springfield, and Kennett in 1826. The signers condemned the mistreatment of enslaved females, saying, "Our fathers rolled their garments in blood and bathed their connections in tears to obtain moral and religious rights. And must a considerable portion of our population be excluded from those benefits which their glory achieved?" One of the petition signers, Elizabeth Mendenhall, was a Quaker and member of an active abolitionist family. Her family assisted freedom seekers at their Guilford County residence and at times transported them out of the area in a wagon with a hidden chamber. An unusual petition in 1799 from inhabitants of Richmond County accused Duncan McFarland of Fayetteville, who was then a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives, of being a werewolf. They claimed that at certain times of the moon, he felt the effects of saliva mixed with his blood as a result of a wound received from a mad wolf. These petitions, and many others, from the mid-1700s to the early 1800s, are actually available to view at home in our digital collections. Let us know if you find anything particularly interesting to you. These have been just a few snapshots of the different types of records preserved at the archives to communicate the past to the present. The State Archives continues to collect the voices of North Carolina citizens for future interpretation. Our current collecting initiative, Your Story is North Carolina's Story, seeks to collect records about the events of 2020, including pandemic restrictions and protests. So far, many people have contributed accounts of their experiences in 2020 and reflections on events while they were happening, including several local middle and high schoolers who have contributed images of life at home, reflective poems, and journal entries. What communication awaits your discovery at the State Archives? And what communication will you create for researchers of the future to discover?